everyone, and welcome to this episode of TouchPoints TV. I'm Alicia Esposito, VP of Content for Retail TouchPoints, and I have on the line with me right now Brian McGlynn, GM of Ecommerce for Coveo. Brian, so good to meet you. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. Nice to meet you as well, and thanks for the opportunity, an invitation to come in and talk today.
Yeah, and I know your company has been doing some very exciting things, has had some exciting developments. Your recent IPO on the Toronto Stock Exchange, but the one I do want to dig into a little bit is your recent acquisition of Qubit, the AI merchandising company, another company we've been separately tracking for some time. So I'm curious, how did this come about? And most of all, why did Coveo think this was a right fit in terms of where the business was heading?
Yeah, I mean, altogether, it's been certainly exciting, an exciting last half of the year and year for us as well. So I look at it from, it seems like it all blurs together. We went through, we launched our line of business in e-commerce really right when the pandemic hit, had a chance to do some interesting things, and things really picked up in 2021, just to really as a capstone for that. We had Qubit came into the family and our IPO, as you mentioned. So with Qubit was an interesting part. We look at it from where Coveo's been strong, our background clearly from search, recommendation, and personalization capabilities that we provided. What we really liked about Qubit, they came in from the other direction of recommendation and personalization. They brought in, it's amazing, we from a joint customer perspective, there's so much overlap from what we've looked at in technologies and other components. We didn't see exactly the same thing from a customer perspective. So there's a lot of great opportunity, but really excited us was their focus, primarily the European market, really, really good footprint coming out of London, where they're headquartered, not to mention some really, really strong installations in luxury brands, some DIY, where we happen to be very strong as well, and as well in the e-gaming side. So it's kind of a new spin on some of the work we're doing. But altogether, just a company that really we've looked at in the market, just a really strong fit from what we do and what they do culturally, product-wise, and just across the board. We're bringing in Qubit.
Very interesting. So very strong synergies and also some good opportunities for further expansion and for some further growth, which is the goal for any company. But for retailers, current customers, future ones, what is to be expected as far as, the future of the Coveo platform now that Qubit has come into the fold and is kind of part of the equation now, so to speak?
Well, certainly one of the things that Qubit brings in, where we've looked at it, we looked at our roadmap where we're developing our product and a lot of what our customers wanted. What was really interesting is the inverse of where Qubit was. There's things when they looked at their roadmap and items that their customers wanted. Customers wanted search. They wanted a lot of other items on top of it, where we look at it from really a strength and from them being a 10-year plus veteran in the e-commerce and retail industry, some real strong merchandising capabilities and some additional personalization items as well. So things like badging, where they've done a lot of work to drive revenue, where based on popularity of products and other items that are out there, they can provide badges that will provide lifts on purpose and revenue. And the other part is if you look at it from that perspective of pages, where they rank and they provide content personalization. I think if you look at it on a whole, we take, for example, just the vision of what a customer would look at, taking a particular page, whether it's mobile or whether it's one that would be put together for a regular website. There's a lot of different opportunities that retailers have to augment revenue. So if we take a North Star metric of boosting at least 10% revenue per visitor and looking at different ways, there's so many opportunities to do that. Whether it be Qubit going in and taking over experiences where content is personalized or there's recommending, where there's badges based on what's popular being used, and then all together with some of the A/B testing they provide. You move that with Coveo's AI and really advanced machine learning, and you provide that with search and some of the other pieces. You start to go into where altogether there's a massive additive nature of really providing relevant experiences across the board. And that's the thing that really we think bringing together, it's a 1 + 1 = 4 scenario for our customers as far as really going in from different sides to provide and capabilities from that. And that's the thing with Qubit. It really, it's almost like Lego blocks. We couldn't think of a better way where two technologies come together from a sales perspective, from a team perspective, from a product perspective, just across the board. It's really a case where we just got right to work and start moving things together on behalf of our customers.
That's great, Brian. And it's interesting that you use Lego blocks as the way to kind of describe the fit or the layers, because, as I think about personalization and e-commerce experience more generally, it seems like, that need for a relevant experience has never been greater. And there's also never been so many opportunities. So you're laying out personalized content, is it badges? Is it, actual product recommendations? There are so many possible components, so many possible combinations for making that customer experience a bit more relevant. So if we were to kind of zoom out, look at the current landscape, Coveo is known as the relevance company. And now with Qubit as part of the equation, a lot of great opportunities. But with every tech investment or any shift in strategy, we hear from our retail readers, it's like, how do I justify the investment, right? How do I validate the need for, this type of solution or this change in direction? So I love your take because, I'm sure you're having so many conversations, have seen so many implementations. What is the case right now? Like looking at the current e-commerce landscape, why is providing this relevant experience to customers so important? What is at risk if retailers do not take action or prioritize this?
That's really, really good point. We look at it, and we just put out a survey not too long ago to look at really where the state of the industry is and the state of the mind of retailers. And I think about it from just overall, it's never been more important. What's an interesting item to look at is you take, for example, the 800-pound gorilla. You look at Amazon and you look at what COVID did. COVID, from a perspective, it really was an accelerator and a catalyst for moving in and adopting technology. The interesting part is with altogether, Amazon, they grew their revenue upwards. It was basically, I think, up to 620 billion gross merchandise volume. I'd have to look it up at this point. But what's interesting is that of the overall revenue pie for e-commerce that grew, Amazon grew less than the overall growth of revenue. So what's happening is those that are doing well, you take the Macy's of the world, you take some of the others that have really adopted retail, in this case, the ones that have embraced AI and really worked with it have benefited and they've captured market share. And that's the thing that is absolutely, for one, there was always the threat. Is there any way we can compete with the likes of Amazon and others? Well, our view, at Coveo, we democratize AI. We make it available where someone like Wayfair has 2,400 software developers. For example, how does a furniture organization compete with that? Well, they can't, but they can partner with a company like Coveo. And that's really what we come into, is providing the tools for companies to go in and provide that ability to invest and really use cutting edge AI to drive those experiences. So from a retailer's perspective, I say it's never been more important to go in. When our study recently came out, we looked at, it was like 98% we're looking at going through to see who's going to adopt AI and bring that in the next 18 months. So it's definitely top of mind. My callback always to the retail industry is it's important to think about it. It's also important to think about the execution of it along those lines. So my advice, really, to answer your question, is what it comes down to with AI for personalization, recommendations, search, any particular advanced way to provide relevance in the experience for customers, got to do it. And it's absolutely an imperative in order to be relevant today and to last longer. And clearly, from what we've seen with COVID, there's financial rewards for doing so as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I know I've realized it in my own experiences. And I think what's been so interesting about the past year and change is that because we are undeniably spending more time online, there are so many new paths to discovering new brands and shopping new brands. I'm going to bring back that word you used, democratize. Like, e-commerce has democratized brand growth and discovery of new businesses, which is great for the consumer, more options. Who doesn't love more options? But it's also trickier for brands to stand out and brands to differentiate and get that acquisition, which I know cost per acquisition has been such a big factor, a big concern for a lot of marketers. But, as far as the concerns at the e-commerce level, we're talking about relevance, right? The challenge, I feel like, is, you go to a site for the first time, that cold consumer, right? It's a cold lead. They don't have the insight or the customer understanding, I guess, so to speak, how much you can understand an online shopper, to personalize that experience or make it more relevant effectively. So it's like they have to engage, they have to click around for that insight, that data to kind of be unlocked, right? And sometimes a consumer may not shop with the brand more frequently enough to get the insight that's needed to highly personalize that experience. So I guess, the roundabout question is Coveo doing anything to help address this issue and help maximize those revenue opportunities? I mean, how are you kind of closing the gap, I guess, especially for those cold or not as engaged shoppers?
No, it's a point you bring up, and it's an interesting area. Our own research, and we look at it from all the research in the industry, whether it's Sapient and other parts that have come up with it, just numerous studies, anywhere from 70 up to 95% of retail of shoppers will not log in before a purchase. And especially in the B2C retail world, that's a key part, whether it be a data privacy item, whether it be an issue of just not wanting to log in, or other parts around it. It's a known problem. And we actually set a sail to look at this. So we had another acquisition called Tuso that we brought into our family back in 2019. Tuso, a lot of really, really great minds around data science and understanding problems. One of the things they looked at was the cold start scenario. And the cold start scenario is really, from a retailer's point of view, for machine learning, and just to back up on that, from a retailer's point of view, to come up and make machine learning and AI work traditionally, you need millions and billions of transactions to learn from. Who bought this? Who bought this? Who bought this? Then going through and mining historically what somebody's bought and the various different components. The reality is, and it's not easy to do. And we saw that from even before COVID and a lot of the others, is that you look at Amazon, you look at the Wayfarers and the others of the world, they have billions of transactions and the horsepower to go and process. But in order to compete effectively against some of the behemoths in the industry, we need to come up with a more creative approach to deal with not billions of transactions, but to come up with the same, if not better, result. So we look at it from one way of that's a driver with dealing with smaller sets of data to come up with meaningful recommendations, personalizations, and other parts. The other vector we looked at as well is with the cookie apocalypse. So this actually for us was really fortuitous for us in timing. By approaching the idea of dealing with less data, we encourage privacy. We're not sharing data across our customers to come up with models for different businesses. We devised a means to look at the actual catalog data and vectorize it. So we call it personalization as you go as far as what we do commercially. But the whole idea is by taking in product data, we can understand the actual nuances of the catalog data and use that to where it understands and maps to the user's behavior. So prime example is, and it actually works in a good sense of really from a person coming in for different reasons. So prime example, if I back up, is someone going to a sporting goods store. The problem is even my past experiences for what I bought may be less relevant. Pricing would be relevant, and then flexibility and what sort of a bracket I'd be in. But those are clues you can get in many cases. So somebody walks in the store and picks up a golf club and walks around and then finds a person or an agent and says, hey, do you have any gloves? Well, there are clues that they're probably more likely going to be looking for golf clubs. And based on the price of what they've picked up and what they're looking at, there's probably a price sensitivity we can look at as well. So these are things that prior to login, you have to look at every single clue. And historically in the analog world, these are things we looked at. We could see when someone comes in and we could guess at time of day. We could guess seasons. We could guess if they're buying golf clubs in summer, it might be their own use. If it's around the holidays, it might be a gift. So all these clues that are out there, we need to translate that digitally, and that's essentially what we've done. So when you think about a transaction in the olden days of e-commerce, we'd be looking through and everything is really just being, okay, what's the price? Where's the category? And then somebody would buy it. And then we'd use some older crude AI to try to make some generalizations and segmentation. And today's modern approach with AI, we're taking every step someone makes on a site, mobile or where it happens to be in the actual store or whatever it is on the digital channel. All of those clues come together. We're getting a multitude of information to drive the recommendations. And what does it mean in terms of benefit? Well, it means lower customer acquisition costs, as you mentioned. The other is higher conversion, which at the same time has an implication for customer cost. And then as well, happy customers. So by giving people what they want when they want it, that's there. And those are the things that we really, when we look at it with retail, with what we're doing doing at Coveo and what we're bringing in with Qubit is all the capabilities to go in and really provide what we would say the best in class analog experience, but in a digital paradigm or a digital persona.
Fascinating. I think that notion of a bunch of little clues that you need to put together and make sense of to determine that next best action or recommendation is so true, because for so long, personalization was very much defined as a certain level of understanding, right? Like certain parameters like name, age, gender, what have you. But it seems like the demand for that richness and that further level of context is really top of mind right now. So I guess the question for you is, as we look ahead to 2022, are we going to see that demand continue to accelerate? And if so, how will that lead to further progress or innovation among retailers? Because everyone's used the word accelerate, right? Like over the past year and change, everything has accelerated. But what does that mean for us this year? Where do you think e-commerce is headed?
I think you bring up accelerate, and I'd say necessitates the other part. And it's really, we saw it with, I go back to in the beginning of the pandemic, we're a cloud provider. We're in the cloud. We're 100% there. A lot of others were not. And it was very clear there's that sudden jolt where, okay, you're either performing or you're not. We've gotten through that part. We've really jolted the economy. But what's interesting is those that have invested in a lot of the core fundamentals of commerce are now at the point where they're going through and looking even further to say, okay, what's the mandate for relevance? We're working with a client right now in the gifting world, and their view is, okay, they have a very specific business case tied to personalization. This is a case where they must achieve a certain amount of additional revenue growth on personalization. So we're seeing a lot more of that, where organizations know they fundamentally need to do it. They need to go in. AI is not even, it's table stakes. Quality AI is a different story. How you implement AI and how you bring it in is really the differentiation. But we've seen it, 98% say they're going to do it. So now what it comes down to is really with 2022, how I see it is the leaders are going to step up. There's no question at this point. The leaders are going to continue to invest. People will take the risks and say, we're going to go in with newer technology. They're going to put the measures in. With Qubit, we brought in a ton of A/B items around it. We've also spent a lot of time. We just released today an open source library for evaluating recommender systems. We've gone in and built a whole attribution model so customers can really measure the true impact of what these items go into. But you think about a page, and we'll show in our sales presentations, here's a blank page, and you can see incrementalism, 2% lift here, 1.5% lift here, 7% lift here. You talk search, you're looking 30%, but still in a lot of areas around it, it all adds up. So the ones that win are they'll pull further ahead. And there'll be those that are in the middle that either have to be aggressive in rebooting, or those that unfortunately will be sold for scrap. And we've seen that too, where some iconic brands have really done a great job building brand equity. But when it comes to the execution phase, whether it's fulfillment or really retailing at this part, have decided they've sold for the brand equity. So we'll see a lot more of that. And as we go into it, even with people deconfining and retail kicking back in as well, there's going to be an entire focus, as we're calling it, not just the one channel, but really the uni-channel, where there's the online, there's the physical, even look at the meta universe as it's going in. All of this built on strong data, and AI is just going to drive it. So the leaders are going to pull ahead. They're going to continue to lead. And we're seeing now as well where Amazon is vulnerable, and those that actually are retailers that truly know their customers, truly know their customer assortments, can do what they do and use AI to really understand the customer needs and make that match.
I think there's some really, really powerful points there, especially the point around testing and noticing those incremental impacts, because we're hearing time and time again that the pressure is on to prove value and prove result from every decision, right? Whether it's content, whether it's a discount, whether it's, a marketing campaign. So being able to have insight and use that data to make incremental improvements around that customer experience. I think the ones that are able to test at that level and, push some limits and realize those gains are going to be the ones to win. So definitely agree with you there. I do try to close out these conversations, Brian, with some closing takeaways or even tips for our audience? Again, because like a lot of our audience, they're the ones who are doing the work, right? Like they're the ones that are putting the ideas into action. So we've talked a lot about personalized experience. We've talked about new ideas for relevance. You talked about the expanding universe. Never thought about like the implications of like the metaverse in context of like omni-channel or unichannel strategy, as you were saying. So any closing tips for the folks that are watching this right now that want to kind of put some of these great ideas and, great insights into action?
I think it's really a key part. And for us, our moniker is really relevance in this part of thinking about the relevance of what it brings in every aspect that's out there. And the things I look at, I look at organizations, the importance of really AI is table stakes. We know that, but AI execution is not. And there's really a big part where we go in. Advice I give to retailers is to think about partnering, but also thinking about measuring. So clearly understanding the impact and what that North Star metric is of where an organization wants to be. Is it a 10% rise? Is it a 10% component that's out there? So from a business perspective, clearly a driver to get there. And the other part is really focusing on really, you think about the core parts of what retail, they'll know what they do. They'll know their customer, but really putting in that focus and technology around every aspect of the customer experience. And really, we've seen time and time again as a siloed approach to where it's a case of, okay, let's focus on search engine optimization. Let's focus on our search component. Let's focus on what we do for putting lineups together in Boost and Berry and what we would do in that. And let's focus separately on community and let's focus separately on that. Somewhat to break it through, I've seen some organizations, whether it's a chief customer experience officer or a customer officer that would go through and really taking that voice of a customer and understanding fundamentally every piece of information, every opportunity where there is to help provide an excellent experience. If you provide an excellent experience that's relevant to the customer, we've also seen they'll spend more. They have no problem because they're anxious to be part of it. So it's not an issue of a race to the bottom on margin. It's really an issue of bringing people in and providing that excellent experience that's out there. So my words I bring into is to really think about it in terms of all those areas where for us, search, really going in, understanding a buyer, understanding a browser and the difference between the two, recommendations, how that goes into it. And really from that bespoke experience from beginning all the way to customer service and other items like that, to think about those parts is really a critical area, all underpinned by AI to make certain that the actual scalability is there, that the actual retailer, their knowledge is being able to be applied not to a set of segments that have been put together, but to truly interact with the user as they go through and deliver that experience that's expected by the user that they've been trained for by the giants out there as well.
Yeah. Well, Brian, this has been a fascinating conversation, a lot of food for thought, I think, for our viewers today, especially as we think about how quickly e-commerce is evolving and how consumers are evolving as well. That need for context, deeper understanding, and just that continuous evolution of the experience as those changes happen. So thank you again so much for taking the time. Again, truly, truly fascinating, and I appreciate you digging into it with me.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. It was my pleasure.
And to all of you, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of TouchPoints TV. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any follow-up questions or comments, drop us a line on Twitter at @OurTouchPoints or on LinkedIn at Retail Touchpoints. We would love to keep the conversation going. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care.